With the announcement of Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, a direct sequel or prequel to Fire Emblem Three Houses, I feel like it would be criminal if I didn't make a video discussing, in depth, the game that introduced me into the Fire Emblem series and sparked my love for the franchise as a whole, as well as discuss its deeply exploitable combat system that makes it the most cheesable game in the entire franchise. This is Fire Emblem Three Houses, a retrospective. Before I begin to discuss this series in depth, I will start with a disclaimer that I am not entirely well versed with the DLC of Fire Emblem Three Houses, as I have never purchased it or played it directly. Therefore, I will not be speaking on any aspect from the DLC. As for why I've been such a huge fan of the game and have never purchased said DLC, it is simply for one reason. I am poor. Before even beginning to talk about the core mechanics of the game, I feel that it is important to discuss the lore of this entry in the series, specifically because I feel as though this shift of focus onto a more in-depth story in this Fire Emblem game sets it apart from its predecessors, and is a large part as to why the entry became so popular, as well as to why it was able to entice many new fans into the series, with me included. However, I will note that I will be giving a somewhat paraphrased retelling of the story, as there are so many tiny details and branching theories of continuity out there that it could be an entire video of its own to cover the massive amount of story within this game. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's begin. The game opens with a fairly long cutscene depicting a war between a woman with light green hair and an old man wielding a bright orange contractable sword. These two people are Rhea the Archbishop and Nemesis respectively. Then we cut to a green-haired girl who sits upon a throne asking a rather stone-faced protagonist their name and birthday. It is here the player can choose to name themselves whatever they wish, but the canonical name of our main character is Byleth. Then we cut to Byleth dizzily speaking to their father Geralt about their strange encounter with the green-haired girl Sothis. From here, the player is briefly introduced to the three main house leaders within the monastery: Edelgard von Hresvelg of the Black Eagles, Dmitri Alexandre von Bleyed of the Blue Lions, and Claude von Regen of the Golden Deer, and is thrust into the introductory map of this game with the goal of routing the bandits that are attacking them. Within the tutorial, the player finds out that through Sothis, they are able to turn back time in order to prevent certain actions from occurring, this being the main gimmick of this entry in the series. After Byleth, Geralt, and the three house leaders defeat the bandits, the house leaders take Byleth and Geralt back to the monastery, where they meet Rhea, who propositions Byleth the position of teacher upon entry to the church. Byleth agrees, which eventually leads up to the player's choice of which house they wish to play as. It is here that I wish to pause to discuss a common issue with the game that many people have, which is the fact that the story between each house is the exact same for the first 10 or so chapters of the game, with the player's choice of house making almost no impact as to what happens within the first half, making it boring upon replay. As such, I am going to summarize the first half of the story as briefly as possible between each chapter. Chapter 1: Three Houses. After choosing which house to lead, Byleth participates in a mock battle with the two remaining houses and wins, affirming their place as professor. Chapter 2: Familiar Scenery. Byleth takes their students out to an area littered with bandits to defeat them. This is the first time the player is introduced to Divine Pulse, an ability that allows the player to go back and change their previous moves. Chapter 3: Mutiny in the Mist. Byleth and the students are introduced to Thunder Catherine and are set to kill a minor lord who is seeking to assassinate the Archbishop Rhea. Chapter 4: The Goddess's Rite of Rebirth. A group of unknown soldiers pillage the Holy Monelysium. Byleth and the students are tasked with dispatching the enemy. It is here Byleth receives the Sword of the Creator. Chapter 5: Tower of Black Winds. Byleth and the students are tasked with taking Ruine, the hero's relic of House Gautier, from Michlin, the illegitimate heir of House Gautier, and his band of thieves. Michlin then turns into a black beast, revealing the consequences of what happens when someone crestless attempts to wield a hero's relic. Chapter 6: Rumors of a Reaper. The Death Knight kidnaps Flayn, leaving Byleth and their students, minus the house leader depending on the route, to retrieve her from the clutches of the Death Knight. At the end of the map, a mysterious figure known as the Crimson Emperor appears, taking the Death Knight away before he can be apprehended. Chapter 7: Field of the Eagle and Lion. The students from all houses take part in a battle reminiscent of a historic war that had taken place many years ago in order to determine the strongest house of that year. Chapter 8: Flame in the Darkness. Byleth and their students are set out to investigate the calamity in Remire village, revealing that Tomas, the monastery librarian, is in fact an evil sorcerer named Solon. Afterward, the Crimson Emperor makes an appearance, revealing that he was the cause for the tragedy, asking Byleth to join his side. Byleth refuses. Chapter 9: The Cause of Sorrow. Ding ding ding! Like as the many of Fire Emblem protagonists before them, this is where Geralt, the father of Byleth, dies. Chapter 10: Where the Goddess Dwells. Seeking to avenge their father's death, Byleth takes their students on a pillage to avenge their father by directly attacking Solon and Kranya. Upon defeat, Solon traps Byleth in a realm meant to be impossible to escape from by man. Sothis, the goddess of Fodlan, living within Byleth, merges her being with theirs, granting them her divine powers, allowing them to escape the darkness they were cast in, with Byleth becoming fully merged with Sothis herself. Chapter 11: Throne of Knowledge. Rhea brings Byleth down to the Holy Monolesium in an attempt to summon forth Sothis and speak with her once again. When this fails, Edelgard reveals herself to be the Crimson Emperor, the evil force the monastery has been fighting this entire time. Pause. This is where the story diverges between the 4 routes within the base game: Crimson Flower, Silver Snow, Azure Moon, and Verdant Wind. Unlike before, I will not be recapping each route chapter by chapter because I don't want to be sitting here typing out the script till next year, so we'll give an extremely brief summary of the story from this point forward for each route. As a quick footnote from here, Edelgard takes over the monastery, with Byleth going missing in action and only reappearing 5 years later. Thus comes the 5-year time skip. Crimson Flower. Edelgard overthrows the Church of Saros and takes over Garreg Mach. Rhea goes batshit over Byleth siding with her. Edelgard, Rhea, and Dimitri fight in the Taltian Plains, killing Dimitri and forcing Rhea back into Garreg Mach in the process. In her rage, Rhea burns down the city around her and transforms into her true form of the Immaculate One. Edelgard slays Rhea, and with killing her, destroys all crests. Silver Snow. Okay, I'm gonna be so honest, I have only played this route one time, and it was because it was my first time doing Edelgard's route, and I didn't know about her route requirements at the time. If you know, you know. So my memory of this route is unironically like this series of simple events. You overthrow Edelgard, save Rhea from the Agarthians, and Rhea goes apeshit for some reason, turning into her true form as the Immaculate One, so you end up killing her anyways. Moving on. Azure Moon. Upon finding out Edelgard is the Crimson Emperor, Dimitri's final shred of sanity breaks, causing him to shift into a more vindictive and bloodthirsty persona than we are used to at this point of the game. Years later, far into Edelgard's military campaign, he becomes all-consumed in his pursuit of vengeance for everyone who died in Duscur, caring for nothing but Edelgard's head on a pike. Fueled by the voices in his head, he takes his army forward on a path of bloodshed until he is brought back to his virtuous self by Byleth, as well as his people's need for their rightful king to return to his throne. With the Fargus army closing in on her, Edelgard, as a last resort, turns herself into Hegemon Edelgard, with this ultimately leading to her demise and the liberation of Fodlan from the Adrestian Empire. Verdant Wind. This is the route where a majority of your questions about the previous 2 routes get answered. Within this route, we somewhat learn of what Byleth exactly is, which is a Nabatean, though a man-made Nabatean, as well as the origins of the Sword of Creator and the other heroes' relics, that being that the weapons were made from the remains of the Nabateans by the Agarthians. Nemesis, as well as the other 11 elites, get reanimated by the Agarthians, with this route ending with a badass tag team fight with Claude and Byleth taking down Nemesis's reanimated corpse. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the entirety of the lore of Fire Emblem Three Houses. Or, well, most of it. Again, I am leaving out a lot of information simply because of the sheer amount of it, but all in all, this is what the vague gist of the entirety of the lore. As far as I am aware, this is the first time a Fire Emblem game focused this heavily on the story and world building within its universe. One may make a comparison to Fire Emblem Fates as a rebuttal, but I cannot help but disagree. While yes, Fates had an engaging story with gripping stakes on paper, the ending of Reach Route essentially boils down to an anime friendship saves all ending, opposed to anything truly interesting. Fire Emblem Three Houses deeply entrenching key characters in each route with the ongoing war and giving them fleshed out motives of why they fight for who they do weighs far heavier than the communal connection of just being war buddies that older entries in the franchise seems to lean on. I feel as though this shift in focus drew more people into the series. Well, that and the abundance of hot anime characters, opposed to the sort of niche community it appealed to via its unique combat mechanics in the past, which overall seemed to boost its popularity opposed to previous entries. Well, its story and its changes to the game's combat, but that is a topic I will get to later. Though the story does take center stage in this entry, I do feel that there are some parts lacking, specifically in how they present the information to the player as they make their way through the narrative, with the backstory of the Nabatheans and Agarthians being done particularly poorly in my opinion. There is never a clear explanation of their relation within the game, and while one could argue this is meant to be more figurative storytelling in an attempt to do a more show than tell type of world building, I'd argue that for a story that hinges so much on the history of its main setting, that being Fodlan, they should be consistent with explaining past events in depth and establish somewhat of an order just to maintain some semblance of continuity within the story it's attempting to tell. Why hinge so much on past events if there isn't going to be a satisfying or eye-opening reveal of what you were initially trying to set up in the first place? Simply from a narrative perspective, it doesn't make sense. Particularly, the ending of Silver Snow fits awkwardly into the overarching plot they attempted to build. In that route, the player sides with the church. You spend the whole route supporting Rhea only for her to go evil in the end anyways. And listen, I am aware this was done because of time constraints and it was easier to reuse the Crimson Flower final boss opposed to making a completely coherent ending for the route. But if corners are going to be cut, why try and make a comprehensive story anyways? Just do your run-of-the-mill Dragon Prince brings together a band of misfits to save the world Fire Emblem story instead of making a half-assed attempt where you contradict your own motives. And like there is an explanation for this somewhere in Crimson Flower, feel free to correct me down in the comments below if I'm wrong, where Edelgard makes an offhanded comment about how at some point the Nabatheans deteriorate to the point where they go mad like Rhea had done in Silver Snow. But like, why then? Like Rhea had been head of the church for God knows how long, with Seteth and Flame by her side for almost just as much time, yet there seems to be no urgency for them to turn. And why is it suddenly now Rhea's time to turn? It is a dumb explanation for a half-assed ending for a half-assed route. Hopefully, in Fortune's Weave, they were able to create a more put-together narrative and add on to the messy but extremely enthralling story Fire Emblem Three Houses tried to tell. And who knows, maybe refining the story will bring in the new fans they are hoping for. With the lore finally out of the way, I can discuss the topic that drew me into making this video in the first place, the combat of Fire Emblem Three Houses. With its entry into the Fire Emblem franchise, Fire Emblem Three Houses brought many changes to the typical combat style of a Fire Emblem game. Weapons now had durability, spells had a set amount of times they could be used, battalions were added giving players access to gambits, as well as the addition of combat arts. The way in which weapon skills were leveled up changed as well, with characters no longer being locked to a specific set of weapon types depending on their class, meaning any unit could be what you needed them to be at any given time. The game seemed to make an attempt to breathe new life into the tired combat system by adding a bunch of different ways the player could customize the build of units. And oh, customize they did. But before discussing that, there is a main mechanic I need to discuss first. Crests. Now I know there is a large amount of you probably screaming at your screen, absolutely shaking in your boots at the fact that I hadn't fully mentioned what crests are until this point of the video. And while yes, crests are important to the lore, I'd rather take a closer look at them through the lens of their utility as a game mechanic rather than their implications in the twisted Fire Emblem Three Houses lore. Crests are unique to those who are descendants of Fodlan's 10 elites, 4 saints, or 4 apostles. Crests essentially function as unique boons specific to the character which has inherited them, with some crests being much better than others. There are a variety of things a crest can enhance in a unit, but in my experience, by far, the most broken crests have got to be the Crest of Flames and the Crest of Fraldarius, whatever. The Crest of Fraldarius has the chance to raise the attack of the weapon the wielder is using. The thing is, Felix seems to proc the damn thing every other second, allowing him to absolutely shred enemy units when given the chance. The Crest of Flames is given to Byleth, the main character. Its ability is to occasionally restore HP equal to 30% of the damage dealt to an enemy, with it also having the chance to raise might, that being attack, as well as also stopping counterattacks. Who overlooked this? Because that is genuinely insane to give an already overpowered unit with insane growths. Like someone didn't think this shit through. When talking about crests, it's important to talk about Heroes Relics. These are overpowered weapons typically locked behind specific characters, meaning you have to recruit someone specifically in order to obtain the one you're looking for. You can also get locked out of the ability to get some depending on the route you play. I will not be covering all of the Heroes Relics because frankly some of them can be pretty dog shit. However, I will speak upon the ones I personally believe are worth obtaining or ones that are just busted and need to be talked about. Ymir is the Heroes Relic Edelgard wields within the Crimson Flower route, and has an absolutely busted combat art. Raging Storm deals bonus damage to draconic enemies, but that's not why we are talking about this weapon. Its main draw is its busted ability that allows the unit to make an additional move after using this combat art. That's essentially a dance for free without actually needing to waste your dancer. Next, I'd like to speak about Thunderbrand. Now, I have not used this relic that much, as I never really make it a note to recruit Catherine in my typical runs. However, while making this video, I am in the middle of doing my first maddening run of Fire Emblem Three Houses, and she is definitely an amazing unit, with, in my opinion, the main draw of Thunderbrand being how early you can get it by recruiting Catherine, and the fact that it is basically a cheaper brave sword with less of a repair cost. The Lance of Ruin is a hero's relic you can get insanely early on that can deal a large amount of damage. For instance, the only thing barring you from getting it is not recruiting Sylvain, a unit you are going to want anyways considering his really good growth and versatility. And like, if you play as female Byleth, regardless of the route, you can recruit him as soon as the option to recruit students from different houses becomes available to you. After recruiting Sylvain, you can get Ruin as soon as Chapter 5 by refusing to give Rhea the lance after clearing the chapter. Basically, getting the weapon with the most minimal amount of effort. The lance itself is really good for dealing with the Death Knight, an extremely powerful and annoying unit that can wall you easily if you don't have the right strategy to deal with him. And finally, Thyrus, the hero's relic that is originally for Lorenz, but is basically Lysithia's birthright. Thyrus is a hero's relic that grants +2 range to magic attacks, as well as Pavace, an ability that eliminates or reduces damage received by the user, and Aegis, an ability that has a chance to reduce bow or magic damage by half, to someone with the Crest of Gloucester, which Lysithia has because of depressing lore reasons you can look into on your own time. With Thyrus, Lysithia essentially becomes a magical nuke that can decimate units from a safe distance with a bit more livability thanks to Pavace and Aegis. An honorable mention goes to Fatal Knot for being available for 2 out of the 4 routes with a pretty good combat art of Fallen Star, which, to quote the Fire Emblem wiki, grants Fallen Star status to a unit, allowing them to cause an attack that would otherwise hit them to miss, then evade all other attacks for the remainder of that combat, cannot make follow-up attacks, can only be used with Fatal Knot. Fallen Star status is only consumed if the user fails to evade the attack normally. Once the user fails to evade an incoming attack, Fallen Star status is consumed to evade that attack, and the user automatically evades all incoming attacks for the remainder of that combat. Yeah, TLDR kind of makes it borderline impossible to counterattack a unit after they use it. Now that we have finished discussing the best heroes relics, it is time to discuss the classes available to you in the game. Throughout the explanation of each class, I may add my own thoughts and commentary on some classes I find particularly interesting. However, before discussing the bulk of the classes, there are the unique classes, those being Noble, Commoner, and Dancer. Noble and Commoner respectively only grant the +5 HP ability when mastered and aren't worth talking about. Dancer, however, is one of the most broken classes by simply being able to allow units to make an additional move after their turn by dancing for them, which essentially sacrifices their own turn. To achieve this class, you must pick a unit with a charm of 13 or more and enter them into the White Heron Cup during the 9th chapter of the game to win the class and give the unit you chose access to it. Now on to the main classes of the game. First are the beginner classes, all of which require a unit to be level 5 and cost a beginner seal. Excuse my absolute butchered pronunciation, but Mimrodon is a sword class which grants the combat art swap. Pretty self-explanatory, but allows a unit to swap places with an adjacent ally, and the ability speed +2 upon class mastery, with sword level needed being D or higher. Soldier is a lance class which grants the combat art reposition, an ability which moves an adjacent ally to the opposite side of a unit, and the ability defense +2 upon class mastery, with lance level needed being D or higher. Fighter is a versatile class which grants the combat art shove. It allows the user to push an adjacent target 1 tile away, and strength +2 upon class mastery, with axe level, bow level, or brawl level being D or higher. Fighter, in my opinion, is one of the only beginner level classes worth it to master because strength +2 can be useful for the early game, especially in higher difficulties where every bit of damage counts. Monk is a magic class which grants the unit the use of magic as well as the combat art drawback, an ability which has the unit move 1 space away from target ally, with the ally moving to the unit's former position, and magic +2 upon mastery. Monk is also a class that, in my opinion, is one of the only beginner level classes worth it to master because magic +2 can be useful for the early game. Second are the intermediate classes, all of which require a unit to be level 10 or higher, with all classes but the Dark Mage requiring an intermediate seal, with Dark Mage requiring a Dark Seal, an item acquired through defeating the Death Knight. Lord is a class exclusive to Edelgard, Dimitri, and Claude, requiring sword level D+ or higher and authority level C or higher. It grants the ability Charm to the unit, which is pretty useless as Charm only affects the stats of any battalions equipped to a unit, and grants Subdue, leaves the enemy on 1 HP when attacking, which is pretty fucking useless, and the ability Resistance +2 when class is mastered. Mercenary requires sword level C or higher, grants the ability Vantage if foe initiates combat, and if HP is less than 50%, the unit still attacks first, when class is mastered. Vantage is actually a skill that can be extremely useful with the right setup, but we will discuss this later. Thief requires sword level at C or higher, and grants the abilities Lock Touch, unit doesn't need keys to open doors or chests, and Steal, gives units a chance to increase drops from enemy units, when class is mastered. Cavalier requires lance at level C or higher and riding level at D or higher, grants the ability Canto. After performing an action, user can use their leftover movement. And Desperation. If unit initiates combat with less than 50% of their HP, unit's follow-up attack, if possible, occurs before foe's counterattack, upon class mastery. Pegasus Knight requires lance level at C or higher and flying level at D or higher, grants the ability Canto and Avo +10 when class is equipped, and the ability Darting Blow, which grants +6 Avo when initiating combat, and the combat art Triangle Attack, a flurry of attacks that flying units perform in tandem, which requires the specific positioning additional 2 flying units upon class mastery. This class is female locked. Peg Knight is a really great class, with its class mastery ability definitely being worth it to obtain for any unit you wish to turn into a baller dodge tank. It is definitely worth it to master. Brigand requires axe level C or higher and grants the ability Death Blow upon mastery. This is a class that is worth it to master for almost all of your units. Death Blow grants +6 strength when a unit initiates combat, which makes hard hitters hit even harder and gives units who may not deal as much damage that final push to make them exceptional. It also has extremely low investment and is incredibly easy to teach to any unit, even those with a deficiency in axes. Armored Knight requires axe level at C or higher and heavy armor level at D or higher, and grants Armored Blow upon mastery, +2 defense when unit initiates combat. I have never found any armored class to be particularly useful. Archer requires bow at level C or higher. It grants bow range +1 when equipped and hit +20 upon class mastery. Archer is a class that may be worth it to master for any of your axe-wielding units, especially in maddening where many enemy units outspeed yours tenfold and make it hard to hit them. Brawler requires brawl level at C or higher, granting unarmed combat upon class mastery. Another fairly lackluster class. Mage requires reason level at C or higher and grants the caster the use of fire magic when equipped, or doubles their uses of the spell if they already know it. It grants Fiendish Blow, which is plus 6 magic when initiating combat upon class mastery. Mastering this class can be very useful for your magical units, allowing them to deal more damage. Dark Mage requires reason level at C or higher and a Dark Seal in order to equip the class. It grants the user the spell Miasma and the ability Heartseeker when equipped. If foe is within a 1 space radius, grants foes Avoid -20. Also grants the user Poison Strike upon class mastery. This class is gender locked to male. On paper, this class seems cool, but it is actually pretty ass. You most likely won't ever get to use Poison Strike with the little amount of time you get to grind class XP, unless you cheese it, but we'll get onto that later. And the class itself is kind of lame, given that magical units are especially effective at a distance, and there's no point of proccing Heartseeker if you're just gonna die anyways by leaving your magic units too close to enemy attackers. Priest requires faith level at C or higher, and grants units access to heal, and grants 5 more heal uses when equipped. Upon class mastery, it grants the ability Miracle, which is a chance to survive lethal damage with 1 HP if HP is above 1. Third is the advanced classes, all of which require a unit to be at level 20 or higher, with all but Dark Bishop requiring an advanced seal, with Dark Bishop requiring a Dark Seal and successfully passing the Dark Mage class in order to obtain it. Swordmaster requires sword level at A or higher and grants the ability Swordfare, which is plus 5 might when a sword is equipped, and Sword Crit plus 10 when equipped, granting the combat art Astra upon class mastery. The combat art being that it triggers 5 consecutive hits at 30% might. This class can be particularly useful for units like Catherine and Felix, who have a high chance to crit or trigger their crest boons when attacking, which makes them extremely deadly when paired with Astra during player phase. Hero requires sword level at B or higher and axe level at C or higher, grants the abilities Swordfare and Vantage when equipped, and grants Defiant Strength. At start of turn, if unit's HP is less than 25%, it grants plus 8 Strength upon class mastery. The class is gender locked to male. In my opinion, Hero is kind of worthless. Its main draw is Vantage, something you can get much earlier and easier by just mastering Mercenary instead. The fact that it is gender locked hurts it as well, because typically if you are trying to play optimally on a file with no New Game Plus, you would want to play as female Byleth for the instant access to Sylvain and Ruin, as well as access to Peg Knight and Falcon Knight later down the line, making Hero kind of useless. Assassin requires sword level at B or higher and bow level at C or higher, and grants the abilities Swordfare, Lock Touch, and Stealth. Unit is less likely to be targeted by enemies when equipped, and grants the ability Lethality, chance to instantly kill a foe when dealing damage, and the combat art Assassinate can kill enemies instantly upon class mastery. The benefits of this class don't come with its abilities that allow for one-hit KOs, but the ability Stealth allowing specific units to take advantage of its utility to optimize massive outputs of damage, but that will be discussed later. Paladin requires Lance level at B or higher and Riding level at B or higher, and grants Canto, Lancefare, which is Might plus 5 when a lance is equipped, Terrain Resistance, which nullifies damage from terrain when equipped, and the ability Aegis upon class mastery. Paladin is an okay class, but I wouldn't say it's worth it to master, but there are definitely units who benefit from it. Warrior requires Axe level at A or higher and grants Axefarer, which is plus 5 might when an axe is equipped, and axe crit plus 10 when equipped. It also grants Wrath, which is if a foe initiates combat while the unit's HP is less than 50%, it grants the unit plus 50 crit upon class mastery. Warrior is a good class for your units with high crit potential like Dimitri, Felix, or Catherine. Wrath is also good for units who can't learn Bat Wrath. However, it is far outclassed by War Master, but again, we will discuss this later. Fortress Knight requires Axe level at B or higher and Heavy Armor level at B or higher. Grants the abilities Axefair and Weight minus 5. Grants Pavase upon class mastery. In general, just don't go armored units. Wyvern Rider requires axe level at B or higher and flying level at C or higher, and grants the ability Axe Fair and Canto when equipped. Grants Seal Defense, which is if a unit damages foe during combat, foe suffers -6 defense for 1 turn after combat, upon class mastery. Wyvern Rider and any flying class really are believed to be the best class in the entire game, with one of its major benefits being the sheer amount of movement you are granted, as well as the low amount of investment it takes to turn your unit into one. That, coupled with the heavy damage you can deal during player phase, easily makes it one of the best classes. Sniper requires bow at level A or higher, grants the abilities Bowfair, which is +5 might when bow is equipped, and bow range +1 when equipped. Upon class mastery, grants the combat art Hunter's Volley, which is 2 consecutive hits. An overall good class which can be used to cheese a specific map if you obtain the right tools and units during the early game. Grappler requires Brawl at level A or higher and grants the ability Fist Fair, which is +5 might when gauntlets are equipped, and unarmed combat when equipped. Grants the ability Tomebreaker, which grants +20 hit/avo when brawling against magic users, and the combat art Fierce Iron Fist, which is basically, I guess, like a worse Astra, as it triggers 3 consecutive hits upon class mastery. This class is gender locked to male. Warlock requires Reason level A or higher and grants the abilities Black Tome Fair, which grants +5 attack when equipped with a black magic spell, and black magic usage ×2 when equipped. Grants the ability Bowbreaker, which grants +20 hit/avo when using magic against bow users upon class mastery. Dark Bishop requires Reason at level A and class mastery of Dark Mage, as well as a Dark Seal. It grants the ability for the unit to use the spell Miasma, the ability Heartseeker, and Fiendish Blow when equipped, as well as the ability Life Taker, which is the unit recovers HP equal to 50% of damage dealt after defeating a foe, upon class mastery. This class is gender locked to male only. This class is just so ass. Adding Fiendish Blow is just dumb, because as a mystical unit, you probably already have this ability from mastering Mage ages ago. Life Taker is actually good and can give some merit to Heartseeker by giving the unit some livability, but the class is just so bad there's no making up for its poor utility with one good ability. You're better off just making your male magic user a Warlock or a Bishop. Bishop requires Faith level at A or higher, grants the abilities White Magic use ×2 and White Magic Heal +10, and Terrain Resistance when equipped. Also grants the ability Renewal, which is when the unit recovers up to 20% of max HP at the start of each turn upon class mastery. Finally, we have the advanced classes, which are available at level 30 or higher and Professor rank C, and requires a Master Seal. Falcon Knight requires sword level at C or higher, lance level at A or higher, and flying level at B+ or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, Lance Fair, and Avo +10 when equipped. Upon class mastery, grants the ability of Defiant Avo, which is if the unit's HP is less than 25%, it grants +30 Avo. This class is gender locked to female units only. This class is widely seen as one of the best, if not the best classes in the game, giving many female units the opportunity to become dodge tanks during the player phase, and with so much movement provides many opportunities for powerful units to clear stages in a minimal number of turns, which can be particularly useful for the run-ending maps of maddening playthroughs. Wyvern Lord requires lance level at C or higher, axe level at A or higher, and flying level at A or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, Axe Fair, and Avo +10 when equipped. Upon class mastery, grants the ability Defiant Crit, which is +50 crit when HP is less than 25%. This class is in the same boat as the Falcon Knight, but being focused on dealing heavy damage opposed to dodging enemy attacks. As well as its investments being fairly low throughout the game, it makes an extremely viable class to use for almost any unit. Mortal Savant requires sword level at A or higher and reason level at B+ or higher. Grants the ability Sword Fair and Black Tome Fair when equipped. Grants the ability Warding Blow, which is if a unit initiates combat, grants +2 res during combat, upon class mastery. Mortal Savant is a respectable class, but is lackluster compared to other master classes and even some advanced classes. Great Knight requires axe level at B+ or higher, heavy armor level at A or higher, and riding level at B+ or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, Axe Fair, and Lance Fair when equipped, as well as the ability Defiant Defense upon class mastery, which, as a side note, I think at this point we understand how Defiant abilities work, which is basically that when a unit's HP is low, they're going to get a boost in whatever stat the name comes after. So like in this case, it's Defiant Defense. So when the unit's HP is low, they get a boost in their defense. Just adding this here because as going forward, I'm going to stop explaining the Defiant abilities because spoiler alert, each masterclass, or not each, but almost every masterclass, gets a Defiant ability upon class mastery. So just a side note there. Anyway, I have never used this class, and I don't really intend to. There's no point in investing in a heavy armor unit in a game where flyers outclass almost everything. And you can easily guide all of your units into that niche thanks to Three Houses' focus on unit customization. Meaning you can easily make units who are geared towards a heavy knight class by the game into a Waver Knight or Cavalry unit pretty easily and make them much more useful to you. Bow Knight requires lance at level C or higher, bow level at A or higher, and riding at level A or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, Bowfare, and Bow Range +2 when equipped, as well as the ability Defiant Speed upon class mastery. This class can be particularly useful for specific units like Bernadetta, and definitely has its strategies and uses enough to justify using it opposed to a flyer build. Dark Knight requires lance level at C or higher, reason level B+ or higher, and riding level at A or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, Dark Tomefair, and Black Tomefair when equipped, as well as the ability Seal Resistance, which is if the unit damages a foe during combat, foe suffers -6 resistance 1 turn after combat, upon class mastery. In my experience, this class is fairly middle of the road in terms of damage output and utility. I find it worth it to use on only like Sylvain and Lorenz. However, Sylvain is much better off in a different class entirely, and Lorenz is a fairly lackluster unit, so investing in him to be a Dark Knight is frankly a waste of a Master Seal. Another unit could benefit from that Master Seal much more than he could. Holy Knight requires lance level at C or higher, faith level B+ or higher, and riding at level A or higher. Grants the abilities Canto, White Tomefair, and Terrain Resistance when equipped, and the ability Defiant Res upon class mastery. I don't see a point in investing one of your units to be a Holy Knight. I have frankly never found any particular use for one, as I find they are outclassed by either Paladin or your standard Bishop. The abilities you get for this class are also abysmal, considering you can get all 3 earlier in the game for much less of an investment. In short, they should have given this class much better tools given the point of the game in which you are supposed to obtain it. War Master requires Axe level at A or higher and Brawl level at A or higher. Grants the abilities Axefair, Fistfair, and Crit +20 when equipped, as well as the ability Quick Repost. If the unit's HP is less than 50% and attacked by foe, treats the unit's attack speed as 4 higher than the foe's, granting the unit a follow-up attack and denying the enemies. And the combat art War Master Strike, which is just an effective attack against all foes upon class mastery. This class is gender locked to male only. This class's utility comes from its sheer crit potential and how broken it can be paired with other abilities, but we will talk about this more in depth later on. Gremory requires Reason at level A or higher and Faith at level A or higher. Grants the abilities Black Magic uses ×2, White Magic uses ×2, and Dark Magic uses ×2 when equipped, as well as Defiant Magic upon class mastery. This class is gender locked to female units only. Gremory is a hard-hitting unit and is particularly good for Lysithea. And that is the final class. Each class has its own merits. I am just giving my opinion on the usefulness of each one I have just listed. You can definitely find uses for classes that I personally don't think are worth much or worth investing, and there's definitely people out there who have strategies for said classes. But I am just going off of my experiences with these classes, with how long I've been playing the game. And with that, I can finally move on to talk about the units. Going forward, I will be using a tier list to discuss each of the units in order to present the material in a more organized fashion. Note, this list is just my own personal opinion of which units are the best and most useful. Tier 1, Never Used. Hanneman, Manuela, Gilbert, Alois, and the 4 units given to you in the DLC are all units I have not particularly used, so I cannot speak on their viability or usefulness to a playthrough. One thing I will say is that Manuela or Hanneman in particular are worth it to recruit in a maddening playthrough, as they have a paralog where an experience gem is obtainable, making grinding up your units a bit faster than without it. Tier 2, Awful. Caspar, Ignatz, Ash, and Raphael are all subpar units simply because they either have bad stats or another unit outclasses them in what they do. The worst unit in the game being Ash in particular. With lackluster growth and useless personal skills, he has more use on your bench than sucking up XP that could be better used on a different unit. Ignatz has some redeeming qualities, with that mostly being from his personal ability of Watchful Eye, which is just free hit plus 20. However, he does pitiful damage and is outclassed by other archers that you can obtain easily. Raphael and Caspar have the same problem of both being in the War Master niche, but being easily outclassed by other units, making it somewhat obsolete to use them unless you're forced to. Tier 3. Usable. Mercedes, Dorothea, Annette, Lorenz, and Flayn are all okay units being good at what they're meant to do, but that's just about it. Mercedes is sort of relegated to a healer and nothing more given her personal skills and growths. Dorothea and Annette are both good at being in the Grimoire class, or for Dorothea in particular, you could put her in Mortal Savant and have just as good of a time using her as well. Lorenz is just lackluster and outclassed by other units in every way and should not really be used unless you're forced to. And Flayn, much like Mercedes, is just a good healer and should be used as such. Tier 4. Solid. All of the units in this tier are pretty good units, offering a variety of uses via their gross and personal skills. However, Hilda, Ferdinand, Leonie, Ingrid, and Petra in particular, in my opinion, are extremely versatile, basically being able to easily become whatever class you need them to be, a trait which I find particularly useful in most runs of the game. The rest of the units on this list are just above averagely good at what they're meant to do, with good growths and promising tools at their disposal. Tier 5. Really good. Bernadetta, Dedue, and Cyril are all in this tier for one reason and one reason only. Access to the ability Vengeance. Vengeance is a combat art that deals extra damage to the enemy based on how low the user's current HP is relative to their maximum HP. With this at their disposal, Bernadetta, Dedue, and Cyril can shred through enemies during the player phase, though using this strategy can be risky due to the low amount of health a unit is required to be at. However, this risk can be negated by putting one of these units into the Assassin class, giving them access to the Stealth ability, making it less likely for them to be targeted during the enemy phase, thus keeping themselves safe. Bernadetta in particular can be deadly due to her personal skill of Persecution Complex, which grants the user increased damage dealt if their health is not full. This combined with Vantage can make her a particularly deadly unit during both player and enemy phases. Sylvain is a good unit due to his versatility and availability, as well as him coming with a free Heroes Relic if you recruit him before Chapter 5. He's a unit who has been carrying me in my Maddening playthrough since he has the ability to be extremely bulky as well as hit very hard. Edelgard and Claude are just good units, plain and simple. This is because they are house leaders, with all the house leaders in this game being particularly busted because of their good growths and personal skills multiplying the amount of EXP they gain when fighting. Edelgard and Claude are also good because of their heroes relics, but I have already discussed those in depth earlier, so there's no need to repeat myself. Flintard is good because of his access to Warp, and that's kind of it. Warp is a magic spell that allows the caster to teleport an adjacent unit. Warp is pretty busted because it can allow you to cheese maps. For example, in Chapter 6, you can simply teleport a unit to the Death Knight and one-shot him with one of the many strategies I have discussed this far, like Bernadetta, Dedue, Cyril Vengeance with Lance of Ruin. Having access to Warp can make long maps shorter and is overall an extremely useful spell with low availability. Because Lindhart is one of the 2 units who can use it, he is on this list. As I have discussed before, Felix is good because of his high speed and crit chances, as well as his ability to proc his crest boon extremely often. TLDR, he's fast and strong, and that's honestly all you really need in a unit. Finally, Shamir and Catherine are both strong units that you can get extremely early in the game, giving you access to a free Heroes Relic, as well as 2 units in advanced classes as early as Chapter 6. Because they are also female units, they have access to Falcon Knight, as previously discussed, one of the best classes of the game. And with their high speed, they can easily become prime candidates for hard-hitting dodge tanks. Tier 6. Game Breaking. With access to Thyrus and the unit with the most amount of spells in the game, Lysithea is a magical powerhouse who can one-shot a multitude of enemies at a safe distance. She is also extremely versatile, with her personal skill, Mastermind, doubling her skill experience, making it easy for her to master classes and obtain any skills or become any class you see fit for her. She is also the only other unit in the game who can use Warp, which, as discussed before, gives you the tools to and otherwise long maps swiftly with the right strategy. Byleth has probably got to be the most overpowered Fire Emblem MC in the entire franchise, with access to the Sword of the Creator and the ability to mold a unit into any class you wish with no deficiencies. Byleth essentially becomes a one-person army, with the unit being able to double up and kill almost any enemy, even on higher difficulties. This, coupled with their insane stat growths, cooks up one of your army's most prolific fighters, as well as her access to the Crest of Flames, which, as discussed earlier, is an insane crest boon that basically becomes game-breaking, considering that Byleth as a unit can proc it very, very often, which is just dumb. It's just dumb. Though speaking of dumb, finally there is Dimitri. And for those of you who already know, cool, here's your certified nerd stamp. For those of you who are unaware, he is absolutely insane. To sum it up, you can build Dimitri in a way where you can give him a 100% crit rate, the ability to always move first, and counterattack enemies from a distance. Yeah, pretty damn broken, isn't it? This can be done because the developers decided to give Dimitri access to the War Master class and the abilities Battalion Wrath, which is when a unit's battalion HP is below 1/3, and a foe initiates combat, it grants the unit plus 50 crit, and Battalion Vantage, which is when a unit's battalion HP is less than 1/3, the unit will always attack first. Now, this setup on its own is insane, but becomes even crazier with the introduction of the Battalion Gamut of Retribution, which allows a player and ally units to counterattack regardless of distance for 5 turns. So, lower your battalion endurance, get Dimitri to the War Master class, slap a killer lance on him, and have a unit use Retribution, and you have the equivalent of a heat-seeking missile during enemy phase that one-shots anything that so much as looks at it the wrong way. Now, you can use this strategy with other units, but they are just so outclassed by Dimitri, it's like, what's the point? There is merit in using other units to do this strategy because Dimitri is locked behind one route, but that is unironically the only downside. It's the fact that you can only access Dimitri during the Blue Lions route. So you can't use his busted ass for Silver Snow, Verdant Wind, or Crimson Flower. Literally the only downside. After discussing the classes, heroes' relics, units, abilities, and certain gambits, can you see why I think this has got to be the most exploitable RPG I have ever played? Just dissecting the combat system alone shows so many power scaling imbalances between classes and units, and shows exactly how easy it is to manipulate the mechanics they give you to become game-breaking. Not to mention the funny little infinite month glitch that can give you infinite resources without having to rely on New Game Plus. Which, by the way, this glitch is extremely easy to perform. This feature is very useful for maddening runs, obviously, because being able to repeat months gives you access to basically infinite XP, skill experience, class experience, and all of the good stuff for your units, which is useful for maddening runs where things like that are severely nerfed to make your life harder. Anyways, compared to other entries in the series, it is clear they dropped the ball on balancing characters and classes, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad entry. In my experience, it made me feel all cool being able to exploit the game to those lengths and feel accomplished for finding strategies that can end maps in unconventional ways. With its focus on departing from the status quo of the Fire Emblem games before it, Fire Emblem Three Houses creates a fun, albeit severely unbalanced experience that is overall an extreme joy to play. However, I will say that I hope Fortune's Weave can have a more consistent combat system with a better blend of old mechanics from previous entries and the new mechanics that Fire Emblem Three Houses had introduced into the series. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive of one of my favorite games of all time. I had so much fun making this video from start to finish and hope you stick with me to listen to whatever topic I decide to talk about next. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time.